And, Jumaane, on the same point as well, we're talking about risk. And, sitting at the investor seat, you as well want to be assured that, the moment I say this ETF, I'm going to be jumping in. But there must be an assurance that, so what are you doing at Africa Eats to ensure that even as you're coming into the market through the ETF route, that, investors will not be having sleepless nights hoping that things will not...
Very good question.
Yeah.
So the start, building on what I just shared before, is knowing there's a market maker is the first one. It means that you can come in and exit anytime.
Okay.
You don't have that with the majority of stocks listed in Africa. So the company Tuesday Markets is providing that market making service. Now, in terms of Africa Eats, we are in the business of taking companies that literally earn revenues of less than $100,000 in revenue, and then we scale them to double-digit millions, and then we list them in the stock market.
Okay.
That's the area in which we focus and we've replicated.
Yeah.
What's fascinating that we find is it's actually the same common issues, regardless of what subsector they're in, that these companies are dealing with. So we've basically been going through this process year after year of how do you identify the risks, and then how do you create, whether it's the governance structures, whether it's the financial structures, whether it's the operational structures, to be able to manage the risk before they actually occur. And so that's basically what we've systemized, which is what he's describing, that process.
Okay.
And because it's a portfolio, it also means that you're not taking risk on one specific company. So if one doesn't happen to perform in a given year because of a drought, because again, I said 23 companies, 9 different sub-Saharan African countries, you now have that risk diversification. The same model applies now to the ETF. That these are companies you're picking across different markets. So initially launching with 3 listed companies, one that's in Rwanda, one that's in Malawi, and then Africa Eats that has the portfolio of the 23 companies. And so every year, the plan is to bring new companies into the ETF. And so over time, we envision this to become a Pan-African pool of different companies, which helps to reduce risk of anything. Because you're right, in agriculture, you can't control drought, weather, etc. But what we've seen is the performance, though. So if you look at risk and reward, the performance of Africa Eats has outperformed the MSCI. So that's the MSCI. So basically the index.
Morgan Stanley.
Yeah, the index for frontier market stocks across the world.
Wow.
It's outperformed private equity over the last 5 years. It's outperformed the majority of most stocks within the continent as well. So when you look at it from an African perspective, you look at it from a global perspective, or from a private equity perspective, the return, which incorporates risk, shows that this is a sector that's worthwhile focusing on.
Okay, that's good enough. I'm converted. No, that's good. And maybe as we come to a close, I think one of the key questions that people would want to know is whether we have timelines so that we can invest.
Yes, definitely. So I would say for this specific ETF, yes, we're excited about being able to launch that this year. But I'd also say we are looking at the larger picture, as Irungu said, and what the NSC has a strategy of multiple ETFs. So our plan is we want to bring ETFs to the markets on a constant basis, whether that's 1 a year or 2 a year, and not just looking at specifically at Africa Eats, but just looking in general about how do we identify high-performing businesses within the agricultural landscape, and then be able to bring them to the market and list them. And even after that, even beyond that, the entire market as a whole.
Awesome. And all the best in that. I can't wait for it. I want to close the conversation, and I'm excited that it's a 2-part way. First, in as much as we are avoiding the security word, we always have issues sometimes. Where we have drought, and there's a whole conversation on food security in the country. And I wanted to bring in this question on how can this focused ETFs transform even the ability of Africa's, financing food security. I think I wanted us to address that as you give your party shot as well, in terms of what you see as the future of Africa. Let me start with you, sir.
No, it's a good question. So something I didn't mention is, so we look at all the participants because we're really building out the sector. And one thing that Africa Eats does is the most important participant in the entire value chain is the farmer.
Absolutely.
And so while we may buy the shares on the stock market, the question is how do they benefit from this entire process?
Absolutely,
So what Africa Eats has done is we've built this into the constitution of Africa Eats, regardless of whoever comes and runs it in the future. Every year, Africa Eats issues 1% new shares. So those are new shares. And then they allocate that to the smallholder farmers who participate in the value chain. So over time, that 1% builds, and those same farmers, right now they benefit when they participate in the value chain because their incomes go up. But income inequality does not solve wealth inequality. The way you solve wealth inequality is you allocate capital, especially in the stock market, which we know will grow, towards these farmers. And so we think that is a model that we want to replicate. Hence why we wrote a book called Berkshire Africa that talks about how do you create models that be able to support the growth of SMEs and then both see the returns and then both be able to have the impact. So we don't think it's an either or. So when we step back and then say, so what do we envision over time? What we envision is that Africa Eats will, again, look at the entire continent, have over 100 companies. But here on the NSE, you'll be able to have direct access to investing in those companies. And so we want to bring the continent to the NSE and allow everybody to be able to invest. That's one. Same thing would apply to the ETF, except as Irungu said, is now instead of you having to pick different companies, you can then have an ETF that's focused on whether it's the subsector, livestock, or whether it's focused on, I want to focus on investing in more climate-oriented businesses, or I want to focus on investing more women or led businesses. Whatever your interest is, being able to provide the ETF that's designed to meet your specific interest and focus, yet still be able to make a return. So one of the key things we did with the NSE was we created a new segment or a thematic segment that we're putting that's both on the main board and on the SME board. And typically what happens globally is when you focus on SMEs, this early stage growth of businesses, you typically lower the regulation, make it easier for these businesses to list. But if I'm an investor, you actually made my life a bit more challenging. Because now I need to do more work to figure out which business to invest in. So we're introducing something which is almost the opposite. We're taking these businesses and they have to meet the same requirements to list as any other company, but we added 3 additional requirements, which are they need to be growing 25% year on year for the last 3 of the last 5 years, the year they list, and then sustain a similar growth rate going forward. They have to be profitable historically, and when they list, they have to remain profitable. If they're not profitable for 2 consecutive years, they're moved off the segment, they join the rest of the board. Same thing for growth, and they can't be highly leveraged. But what does that mean for the investor? It now means that instead of me having to do the work of figuring out, is this going to perform this year? Is it going to, or is it not going to perform? Should I put my capital there? Should I not? If I know they're growing, they're profitable, and they're not highly leveraged, so there's not too much debt supporting their growth, it's almost a no-brainer of allocating capital to this segment. And that's where we're going to be listing the ETF, and that's where we're going to be bringing more companies from Kenya, from East Africa, from the continent that can be listed on the NSE that everybody globally would have access to. And so that's what our vision is, to be able to provide that access.
Wow, I feel like clapping. This is so good. Okay, man, no pressure. But let's talk about your parting shot in terms of the vision that you have, especially in this particular segment that you headed at the NSE.
All right.
And what should investors expect?
So I think I'll speak about it in terms of our core values. So one of our core values, of course, is integrity, excellence. We also have boldness and leadership. So those 2 plus innovation is what we are taking up, especially on the agri sector. So how can we be able to innovate? This agri ETF is just one of the many. So we'll also be we have our Agri Ibuka. So the Agri Ibuka is also an incubator accelerator. So if you have a business out there, you need to be handheld, we have that. And then we're also looking at even real estate investment trust. It's not just for building. We can also have one for a factory. You have a dairy farm and all that. So we're actually looking at having new products come up. In fact, and even for the Islamic, the Sukuk. So we're also planning to have some of those come on board. So why are we doing all this? We want to be able to be, you see, like there's one time I had a paradigm shift. You know, you can look at a farm, but you're just looking at it like growing, but it can also be like a factory. It's actually generating. You just imagine how it from soil it's to actually something that you can eat. It's a factory, it's a production. So that's what farming does, that's what agri does, but we want also as the NSE to be the backbone to be able to drive that. So we are looking at transforming this nation by transforming the agricultural landscape through the capital markets.
Wow. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. That has been Jumaane Tafawa, co-founder and director at Africa Eats, and Irungu Ogema, business development sector leader in agriculture right here at the NSC. And all I can say is that look out for it. The ATF is coming, and you've heard from the horse's mouth themselves and what is happening. The vision is amazing. I can't wait as well to invest in it because we need the food, don't we? So thank you so much for your time. I leave you now with the mic.